What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers. Subscribe to our Patreon free for behind the scenes stuff. Arm yourselves, life and typology stuff. The ASPD sociopath investigation is proceeding well. We have a handful of participants. We have a whiteboard put together. And I'd like to continue investigating before we dip back into sociopath stuff. But for now, a nice little narrow video, because a few people are interested specifically in typology and ASPD, the overlap, or characteristics. And even now, this early, one characteristic is standing out. People with ASPD feel and act like the quintessential forms of their types. And I mean this both in a using their functions better way, and also in a vibes sort of way. You do typology for a while, you get a taste for each type. Defined by their functions, yes, but altogether there is a flavor to them. And I think that flavor is defined by function placement. And with these sociopaths, I'm thinking about their functions and their flavor similarly to the way we might think of wolves and dogs. And I don't mean that strictly in the aggressive, less aggressive sense. More in the these two things exist at the same time, but one got socialized and one didn't. You have the form of, and I don't know biology or animal kingdom shit, but let's say the form of canid. Wolf is canid adapted to one set of circumstances, and dog is canid adapted to another set of circumstances. Sociopaths' functions are very pronounced. You think about how would this function or these functions operate in a vacuum. That's close to what sociopaths are, at least in my present observations. For example, they have a sharper command of FE. Alright, they can understand and move people where they want to move them quickly. If you're an FE type and you have any access to your FE powers, much of the time, if you want to use your FE in a pointed way like this, unless you have societal justification or you're using your FE in a weird direction, there will be hesitation or slips. With FE, sociopaths don't hesitate and they don't slip. They're also good at getting quick, frank appraisals of people, unburdened by, well, maybe this or well, maybe that. TE puts ideas and things and people in boxes quickly, efficiently. And with TE, you always have FI operating, and it's interesting that in sociopaths, FI is still operating, even in a way that might be familiar to baseliner FI types, but when they're using their TE, even if they have those principles, and they do care about them deeply, care enough about them to be violent about them, they will completely ignore them. And then you have things like FI. Sociopath FI will moralize and poeticize. And what's interesting is where a baseliner FI type will have a selection of FI principles or values, all of which they'll be like stakes, stakes in the ground or a bed of nails, let's say, right? If you have enough of these stakes sticking up or nails sticking up, it can almost operate like a solid surface. It isn't a solid surface, but it can operate like one. And over that surface, you can lay day-to-day life or socialized life shit. Because you have enough of these points, you can create a flat, acceptable surface. Sociopaths do something very similar, but they have, at least they seem to have, only a few stakes and or nails, but they aren't nails, they're like pikes. Just a few things they are very concerned with, violently concerned with. Hard to lay too many things flat across those pikes, but if you are in moral alignment with them, then it's nice to have those pikes on your side, because when push comes to shove, where you or a baseliner FI type would again hesitate and consider the placement of all the smaller stakes or spikes, nails, around the point you're getting concerned with, they will stick the pike through somebody's head immediately. And then extroverted intuition, perceiving function, I'm still working on understanding them, but there's a pronounced chaos to them, a chaos to their impulsivity, which is saying something because impulsivity is really big with sociopaths. With other sorts of sociopaths, there seems to be a rhyme and a reason to their impulses, or circles of impulses that happen at different times for different reasons. Any dominant sociopaths, their impulses could really be anything, and they'll do anything, just to see what will happen. It's that, well, I don't know if I talked about it in the video. I think I did. Yeah, I did in the last video. That curiosity. So all the functions are heightened. And knowing that, I hope you can see what I mean by distinct or distinctive type flavors. There are a number of INFJ sociopaths in this little investigation. They're interesting because they are at once open and forward about their manipulation that they manipulate, and their selfishness on top of it. But then there's also this involuntary aid flavor to them. Very Boethia-ish. The same way a baseliner INFJ will go on and on about empathy and kindness and how they're such a good person, but they can't help hurting people. There's a fascinating element to these INFJ sociopaths by which, even when they are setting out to do fucked up things for the sake of doing fucked up things, they accidentally help people in small ways. Or maybe intentionally, who knows? Sociopath INFJs are like circus mirror versions of normal INFJs, which is funny, because INFJs, baseline INFJs, are like circus mirror versions of sociopath INFJs. The sociopath INFJs seem more honest and normal. That entire type makes me sick, but if nothing else, they are interesting. We have one INTJ, and this one has all the characteristics of a typical INTJ, but the aggression and poetry are both through the roof. Which is interesting because most INTJs are pretty aggressive and pretty poetic. Imagine an INTJ without the limiters. You get a hyper-aggressive individual whose life revolves around the poetry of living by a code. And once you've interacted with an INTJ like this, baseline INTJs all begin to look like burnouts or failures to launch. Because I think of the types, INTJs are the most antisocial by nature. And again, not asocial, antisocial. But going antisocial comes with a lot of risks. So you get what baseline INTJs are. But this sociopath INTJ is miserable, so maybe INTJs are designed to be miserable. And how far you can or are forced to neurologically go defines the sort of misery you're stuck living with. Are you miserable because you never lived up to your potential? Or are you miserable because you did live up to your potential? And ENTJ sociopaths. Do you remember the South Park Russell Crowe bit? Fightin' round the world? They are cantankerous. And the functions placement, especially in contrast with that INTJ, makes them interesting. Because they have clear, defined values too, but with them, and I'm sure they do care about these values for particular reasons particular to them. But it also feels like they use their values as excuses to feel righteously angry at something so they can vent their violent or otherwise antisocial impulses. Because across the board with sociopaths, it seems like these impulses build up. And they'll spend a significant portion of their lives finding ways to manage these impulses and then managing them. Because the impulses are always growing, or at least are always in the background, they're always there, always getting larger, and they always need to be dealt with somehow. ENTJs are just very forward and not all that subtle with their management strategies. But that's part of their charm. Oh, and that's another ASPD MBTI interesting overlap. The ways by which these types, different types, manage their ASPD urges. The NE-DOMs don't seem to manage them much at all, but the judgers seem to manage them largely using their extroverted judging functions. The INFJs like taking people apart mentally and emotionally, getting them to open up just to see if they can or just to do it, and then damaging them in some way and bouncing. I still don't think that's exactly what happened in my case, but maybe I'm coping and I'm ready to accept that. Particularly because overall, whatever the intentions were, the intent didn't matter as much as the impact did. The impact, things got fucky, but valuable, though I'm still choosing to believe her intentions were positive. Whereas the NTJs are a lot more direct. They want to break things, they want to hurt people, they want to control things in a very straightforward, overt, efficient manner. And it's better for them when they have that ideological or moral justification. But they don't need it. Because another thing I'm finding is all varieties of sociopaths are constantly scanning people for weaknesses. And a core reason that they'll want to attack people because they don't just see a weakness. If they see a weakness, in all of them, an urge will begin to rise to take advantage of that weakness. They can't help noticing the weakness, and it takes a lot of work for them not to take advantage of it once they've seen it. But this isn't a strictly sociopath video. We'll save that stuff for the future. Wrapping up, I think socialization is like a substance. It's like beer. The more socialized you are, probably the more fun you'll have in life, the easier of a time you'll have communicating with other people who are also drinking, but it also makes you dull and stupid and vulnerable. And if you are a baseliner, even if you hate society, hate people, this and that, you're still a baseliner, your amygdala field is still plowed and fertile. Some socialization seeds still got in. Ergo, you're still a little drunk. And you'll always be, probably no matter how hard you try not to be. Whereas sociopaths, ironically, because they're addiction prone, are sober. Hard to fit in with the drunk people, probably not amused by the drunk people, but if some bad shit happens, or if they need to do some bad shit, they're sober around a bunch of drunk people. And I think that's also in part why their functions are so pronounced. When you are drunk on socialization, communality fuzzes out the sharper edges of your functions a bit. Because if your functions were operating in their highest form, their rarest form, you'd have a very hard time fitting in because of those sharp edges. They would catch on things, they would cut things. Socialization smooths the edges. Sociopaths, with their underdeveloped amygdalas, retain their sharp edges. Their functions are a lot sharper. Now, I'll note, this doesn't mean their functions are better necessarily. It's all about adaptation. That's why I talked about the wolves and the dogs thing before, right? Because you think about wolves and dogs, immediately your mind thinks food chain and wolves are better, but by and large, dogs are a lot better off. Why? Because dogs are socialized. They are within the machine of society. A baseliner's life, moment to moment, is going to be a lot easier than a sociopath's life is. Because the machine is built for them. Sociopaths will have a hard time day to day in society. But when you get into one of these antisocial moments, something really fucked up is going on. That's where sociopaths shine. And those are probably the situations that birthed sociopaths in the first place. As I'm learning about all this stuff, I am liking how much sense it all makes. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.